January 20th, 1936, Sandringham House, Norfolk, 11:55 in the evening. The King of England is unconscious. His breathing is shallow. His family has been summoned. The Archbishop of Canterbury has already given the last rites. Lord Bertrand Dawson, the royal physician, picks up a syringe. He injects a lethal combination of morphine and cocaine directly into the king's jugular vein. At 5 minutes past midnight, King George V is dead. That night, Dawson sent a message to the editors of the Times newspaper. He wants to ensure the announcement reaches the morning edition, not the evening papers. The official cause of death, bronchial catarrh. Peaceful, natural, expected. For 50 years that was the story. Then a historian opened a private diary, and everything changed. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not a mystery waiting to be solved. The confession exists on paper, in ink, in Lord Dawson's own handwriting. In 1986, historian Francis Watson gained access to Dawson's private diaries, held at the Wellcome Institute in London. What he found, and published in History Today, was a contemporaneous first-person account of a sitting royal physician administering a lethal injection to the King of England, timed to serve the convenience of a newspaper's print schedule, not to relieve suffering, not as a final act of mercy after unbearable pain. Timed, deliberate, documented. Under English law at the time, this was voluntary manslaughter at minimum, possibly murder. No investigation was ever opened. No charges were ever considered. The palace managed the revelation with 2 paragraphs of carefully worded acknowledgement and then moved on. The question that was never asked, the one that should have been, is why? George V had never been supposed to be king. His older brother, Albert Victor, died of pneumonia in 1992. He inherited the succession along with the role he had never trained for and, by most accounts, never entirely wanted. He reigned for 25 years. He navigated the First World War, the rise of the Labour government, Indian independence movements, and the abdication crisis of his son Edward. He was, by the assessment of his own courtiers, a man of duty rather than ambition, solid, predictable, uncomfortable with change. Lord Bertrand Dawson was his physician from 1907. He was not merely a doctor. He was a political figure, a public intellectual, and an early and prominent advocate for what he called euthanasia, a word he used publicly in a 1931 address to the Church Assembly, where he argued that the state should permit the deliberate ending of life to prevent unnecessary suffering. That speech received significant coverage. It was controversial, and it was given 6 years before he administered the injection at Sandringham. Dawson knew exactly what he believed. He had said so publicly. By January 20th, 1936, the king was failing. He had suffered from chronic lung disease for years, the consequence of decades of heavy smoking. His doctors had been managing a decline, not treating a recoverable condition. On January 15th, he made his last diary entry. 4 words. Dawson came to see me. By January 17th, he was confined to bed at Sandringham. By the 19th, he had largely lost consciousness. The official bulletins, drafted by Dawson and released to the public, described a man in a peaceful decline. The king's life is moving peacefully towards its close. What the bulletins did not describe was the timeline inside that room. Here is what the diary records. At approximately 9 p.m. on January 20th, Dawson concluded that the king was not dying quickly enough. The family was present. The archbishop had given the last rites, but the death was prolonged, and Dawson had a specific concern, one that had nothing to do with medicine. He did not want the death announced in the evening papers. He wanted it in the Times, the morning edition, a matter, as he put it in the diary, of dignity and the appropriate occasion. He prepared a syringe, morphine, cocaine, both injected directly into the king's jugular vein. At 5 minutes past midnight, King George V is dead. The Times carried the announcement in its morning edition. But here's what makes this stranger than almost anyone has acknowledged. Dawson didn't hide what he had done. Not from himself, not from the diary. He recorded it in enough detail that 50 years later, a historian could reconstruct the timeline precisely. He wrote it as if it were a medical decision, defensible, considered, appropriate, which raises a question that the legal commentary in 1986 barely touched. Did Dawson believe he had done something wrong? The diary entry for January 20th, 1936, is not a confession written in shame. It reads as a clinical record. Dawson noted the condition of the patient. He noted the presence of the family. He noted the inappropriateness of a prolonged death under these circumstances. He noted, and this is the line that historian Francis Watson flagged immediately, that he had contacted the editor of the Times to ensure the announcement would be held for the morning. Then he recorded the injection, the dose, the method, the time of death. Watson described the entry in his 1986 History Today article as among the most remarkable documents he had encountered in decades of royal historical research. Remarkable not for what it tried to hide, remarkable for what it did not bother to hide at all. Dawson died in 1945. He never faced any professional sanction for what happened at Sandringham. He was, by the time of his death, one of the most decorated physicians in England. So, who knew? That is the question the 1986 revelation should have forced, and it is the question the palace was very careful not to answer. Under the law as it stood in 1936, and as it stood in 1986, what Dawson described in his diary constitutes a clear case for criminal investigation. The king had not consented. There is no record of any advance directive, any family request, or any formal medical consultation that preceded the injection. Dawson made the decision unilaterally. The motive, as stated in his own handwriting, was not the relief of pain. The king was unconscious. Dawson wrote about dignity and newspaper timing. What Dawson did fits the legal definition of voluntary manslaughter in English law, the intentional taking of a life without malice aforethought, in the belief that the act was justified. Some legal scholars reviewing the diary in 1986 argued the case for murder was not unreasonable. None of this was ever tested in court, because no investigation was ever opened. When Watson published his findings, the palace response was measured silence followed by careful words. Officials acknowledged the diary existed, acknowledged its contents, and noted, with some precision, that the events described had occurred 50 years ago and that Lord Dawson was deceased. That was the end of the official response. But the 1986 revelation did not emerge in a vacuum, and the reason it took 50 years is not simply that the diary was sealed. The Wellcome Institute received Dawson's papers after his death in 1945. They were not sealed under any official government restriction. They were not classified. They were donated private papers accessible to researchers, sitting in an archive in London for 4 decades before Francis Watson read them closely enough to understand what he was looking at. The 50-year gap was not a government suppression. It was something more ordinary and more troubling. Nobody looked. Or rather, the people in a position to look chose, for 40 years, not to look closely. Dawson was a peer, a decorated physician, a man of the establishment. The death of George V was settled history. The official record, bronchial catarrh, peaceful decline, expected end, had been accepted and repeated so consistently that it had acquired the texture of fact. When Watson did look and did publish, the response was revealing. The British Medical Journal did not call for a review. The Royal College of Physicians issued no statement. Parliament asked no questions. A historian had documented what appeared to be an unlawful killing of a reigning monarch by his personal physician, and the formal response was noted. And here is the detail that the 1986 coverage largely buried. This was not the first time Dawson had expressed support for ending a patient's life without their consent. 5 years before Sandringham, Dawson had addressed the church assembly. His subject was the end of life. His argument was unambiguous, that society should permit physicians to end the lives of patients facing painful or undignified deaths without requiring the patient's consent if the patient was incapacitated. He called it euthanasia. He advocated for it publicly, in print, with his name attached. The speech caused significant controversy at the time. The Church of England rejected his position. It was reported in the national press. Dawson knew the argument was contested and made it anyway. What the 1986 discovery revealed, in retrospect, was that Dawson was not theorizing. He was describing a practice he believed was legitimate. And when the moment came, in a bedroom at Sandringham on the night of January 20th, 1936, he acted on it. Whether the king would have consented, whether he had days remaining or hours, whether the morphine and cocaine served any palliative purpose at all, none of that was recorded. None of it was apparently considered necessary to record. Lord Bertrand Dawson received the title of Viscount Dawson of Penn in 1936, the same year he injected the king. He continued to practice medicine. He continued to hold public positions. He died in 1945, honoured by his profession and his country. King George V was buried at St. George's Chapel, Windsor. His reign is remembered, by most accounts, as a stabilising period in modern British history. The official cause of death, bronchial catarrh, remained on the record until 1986. In some official contexts, it remains the listed cause today. Francis Watson, the historian who uncovered the diary, published his findings in History Today. The article ran without significant national controversy. It did not trigger a parliamentary inquiry. It did not prompt a review by the British Medical Association. The diary remains at the Wellcome Institute. The morning edition of the Times from January 21, 1936, carries the announcement of the King's death, timed to the hour Dawson planned. There is a word in English law for the deliberate unilateral ending of a life without consent: unlawful killing. There is a word for the act of documenting that killing in a private diary, donating the diary to an institution, and trusting that the weight of title and reputation would insulate the record from scrutiny. Impunity. Lord Dawson did not bury the confession. He simply assumed no one important enough would ever read it. He was right. Thanks for watching this video. If you like this video, let us know where you're watching from and at what time you are watching. It helps to subscribe to the channel to keep this channel alive. If you have a topic we need to cover, let it know.